What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to the SI Sooners podcast. It is our Sunday post-game episode, our very first Sunday post-game episode. So I hope you guys are ready to talk about last night's game. Oh my God, Parker, I said it on our post-game video recap last night, and it is still the number one thing to me that stands out 24 hours later. Can you believe we got to go to a college football game last night? No football in the Big Ten, no football in the Pac-12. Football in Stillwater got postponed, so all of our media colleagues are still waiting in the game that they didn't go to last night. Last night's game was like 3 different dates in the making, Parker. September 5th, then the coronavirus shutdown, bumped it up to August 29th, then COVID tests, they pushed it back to September 12th, and the NCAA got involved. By the time we actually got to the stadium, Parker, I got there about about an hour before the game, about 5 o'clock, which is really late for me, by the way, for a football game. I still had my doubts last night, Parker, that they were going to play this thing. And then Lincoln Riley tells us last night in the postgame comments that the quote from the Missouri State president earlier in the week was pretty much accurate when he said the game was in serious jeopardy. Parker, Lincoln said it hung in the balance for a little bit. What did you think?
Well, I can understand why, John, because the Sooners did have 20 players that were inactive, 20 that we know of. There might have been more, but they were extremely short-handed yesterday. Now, Missouri State, they claimed that all 72 of their players tested negative and they were at full strength. So it really came down to the Sooners' health rather than the Bears' health. I think if the expectation would have been that the game was going to get canceled, it would have been because of Missouri State's COVID-19 issues, just given the fact that Oklahoma has not really been affected nearly as much as some other programs by the pandemic. But you mentioned it, John. There was a very real chance, very late in the week, that this game would not get played at all. But man, once they got out there on the field, I'm with you, John. I sat up there in the photo deck and I had chills for about 20 minutes as the game crept closer and closer, just realizing that in the midst of a global pandemic, we got to go to a football game. We got to watch the Sooners hit the gridiron in 2020. And obviously, we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. We don't know what next week is going to bring. But man, it was awesome, all things considered, given the circumstances across the country, across the world, to just take in some football on a Saturday night.
Yeah, my wife, when I got home last night, we were driving home, and she said, "Were you excited about the game? So was the game exciting?" And I said, There was nothing exciting about the game. I was excited to be back at work. I was excited to be out of my little cave here, my little man cave that I've turned into an office, that I've turned into a studio. I was excited to be back on the road. I hate driving to back and forth to Norman, and that's like the second or third time I think since March that I've gotten to do that. I was loving every minute of it. I got to sit at a football game in a press box with some of my colleagues and eat chocolate chip cookies, and I had a turkey wrap. It just felt so normal, Parker. That's the cool thing to me. I'm John Hoover. I'm in Tulsa. That's Parker Thune. He's in Norman. Thanks for listening once again to the SI Sooners podcast. Thanks for checking out SI Sooners, allsooners.com. A lot of you guys have taken that on, and we appreciate it. We try to do as much good work as we can for you. And I want to thank you for watching the SI Sooners podcast, as usual. You know who you are. On YouTube. So this podcast, you guys that have listened to us, we break it down into 3 segments. Now on these Sunday recap pods, I kind of want to go deep dive into the games, into the actual games, and say, here's what we saw last night. And if you want to keep up, I strongly recommend you go to SI Sooners. URL is allsooners.com, because we're going to be referring back to the stories that we've written a lot for the website. Tonight's podcast, though, we're going to hit on what was good about last night. We're going to hit on what was bad. We're going to talk about who really kind of stood out and who I think maybe needs to go back to the drawing board, back to the lab, as the kids say. And then I think you saw, all the highlights. I think you know all the stats by now, 48-0, Spencer, Rattler, all that stuff. You know all that. What Parker and I are going to do, we're going to give you a handful of plays that maybe you didn't really notice. Maybe you went to the kitchen for a sandwich, or maybe you were at the game, but maybe you were, I don't know, in line to use the hand sanitizer or something. I don't know. Maybe you watched every play and you just don't really remember them all, like me. So I had to go back and watch it again today. It's not like I'm some whiz at this. Let's start there, Parker. What was good? What was bad? For Oklahoma's part, Parker, what did you like about last night's game?
Well, I don't want to speak too much to scheme, John, because I'm going to have to go back and take another look at the film and Lincoln Riley's play design and how the structure all settled out for the Sooners in last night's game. But in terms of the individuals that took the field, we saw a lot of guys get extended action, which is the kind of thing you expect, the kind of thing you want to see against an FCS opponent. Hopefully it's an opportunity for you to get looks to a bunch of different players, and the Sooners did that. Most of the offensive starters only played a half or even less than a half in some cases. Creed Humphrey was out by the second quarter. Many of the defensive starters played on into the second half, some even going deep into the fourth quarter. But we got to see a good mix of experienced, established veterans and newcomers for the Sooners. And I was really impressed with the contributions of some of the freshmen, and I'm sure we'll talk about them later on. But you look at Seth Mcgowan, both his first career carry and his first career catch go for touchdowns. Mikey Henderson had several receptions in the H-back role. I think he flashed a little bit of that open field elusiveness and those sure hands that should excite Sooner fans going forward. Obviously, he won't be expected to do too much behind Austin Stoddard and Braden Willis and Jeremiah Hall this year, but definitely one to watch down the road. And hey, you look at a guy like Reggie Grimes, it took an intentional grounding penalty to cost him his first career sack as a Sooner, but he was a constant presence in the backfield in the snaps that he got. And hey, Chandler Morris didn't look half bad in the one drive that he got. So really all around, very positive contributions from the true freshmen. Probably more so than anybody, I'd look at Marvin Mims. 3 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown, and some phenomenal punt returns. I think he and McGowan probably have the best chance going forward to garner extended playing time for the Sooners. I don't necessarily think this game was a one-off for Mims and McGowan in particular, but I think a lot of these freshmen have an opportunity to make an impact for the Sooners for the rest of the season going forward.
I'll tell you what I liked, Parker. I liked Spencer Rattler, obviously, 14 of 17, 290 yards, 4 touchdowns. His 303.3 rating was just ridiculous. 2 of his 3 incompletions were not just drops, but they were dropped touchdowns. Like he literally should have been. I went back and counted it up. 16 out of 17 for 318 yards and 6 touchdown passes. That's what he should have been. But, drop passes happen, so what are you going to do? I like the 2 spectacular freshmen, the guys you mentioned, Marvin Mims and Seth Mcgowan. I'm with you. I don't think this is a one-off. I don't think this is endemic of being, part of the whole central Missouri State. I don't think this is endemic of being part of the whole Missouri State thing where you're playing an overmatched opponent. The whole, sure, they were freshmen, they're going to play against these guys. No. These are frontline players. These are guys that are going to be frontline contributors for Oklahoma all season long. I'm going to tell you, Parker, who Seth Mcgowan reminds me of, okay? The way he runs. And you're either going to know exactly what I'm talking about or you're going to think I'm crazy. You ready?
Let's hear it.
It's Mark Clayton. Yeah, Mark Clayton, that Mark Clayton from the mid-2000s, 5'10", kind of a skinny receiver, but he was exceptional, was just exceptional after the catch. His turnover, the way he churned his feet, and the way he changed directions, it just Seth Mcgowan all over again. I remember Bob Stoops told us one time about Clayton back in 2004, and I got to say, I love this word to describe a football player. He was describing Mark Clayton, and he said he was sudden. Sudden. And I'm like, hey, I love that word. I've been using it ever since because that's a great word. So I thank Bob Stoops for that contribution to my vocabulary in describing football players. Mark Clayton was sudden. And Parker, I'll be damned if that's not exactly the word Lincoln Riley used on his replay show tonight to describe Seth Mcgowan. He's exactly right. He's like literally like my Siberian Husky. When he goes from one room to the other, when he goes from the bedroom to the kitchen or the living room to the other bedroom or wants to go outside, everywhere he goes, he is in a freaking hurry to get there. You got to run a sweep, he runs at full speed. You got a little zone scheme action up front, he runs at full speed. You got to make a cut, yeah, he does that full speed too. I love watching that kid run. And then Mims, you mentioned it. He's I know it's Missouri State, and I know they suck, but the fact that you got to start every drive that he gives you a punt return, you got an extra 22 yards further upfield. I'm telling you, that stuff matters. I know he's not going to get 22 yards every time he returns the punts against the Big 12 teams, but this kid major contributor, and not just at receiver where he caught the 3 passes for 80 yards and looked really good on that deep ball. I'll tell you what else I liked. I liked the defense, especially the linebackers, especially Brian Asamoah. Oh my gosh, what an active and enthusiastic and energetic player he is. I like Theo Weiss, even though he only got 2 catches. And I liked Austin Stogner, who I think he only got 1. But your man Stogner ran a good route, caught the football with his hands, and then trucked his poor guy. I like Mikey Henderson, 3 catches, 47 yards, some good blocks out on the outside. Very active kid, very versatile, played in the backfield, got on the end of the line of scrimmage a couple times, played in the slot. And then what I think I liked most about last night, I hope you'll enjoy this, was the tweet from Gabe Burkich, who was out with COVID, we think, or contact tracing, we think. Who knows? We don't know. But about 20 minutes after kickoff, Gabe Burkich tweeted, "I just woke up. Alarm clock didn't go off. I'll be back." Now, Parker, I had a good time with that, and I hope everybody else did. Some silliness, some levity in a moment of tension, sure. But let's get brutally honest here, and keeping in mind that these are college kids, not really that, so we can't really be that brutally honest. About last night, what did you not like?
Well, it's hard to pick out one thing that didn't go well for the Sooners because it seemed like on the whole everything was working, but I think you have to be concerned more than anything about what you mentioned, positive tests and contact tracing, because look, you can get away with playing a team like Missouri State down 20 of your active contributors on the roster. That kind of thing is just fine against an FCS opponent. But when you get into Big 12 conference play, and listen, I get that it wasn't a great weekend for the Big 12. Big 12 went 0-3 against the Sun Belt. It was not a good week, top to bottom, for the conference. Nevertheless, it's going to be tough for Oklahoma if they are this ravaged or anything close to this ravaged going into conference play. They need everybody, or nearly everybody, as many guys as they can possibly have at their disposal. Because Big 12 teams, regardless of how they looked in week 1, and especially coming off an offseason that was riddled with all kinds of COVID-19 related cancellations, and it was just chaos for a lot of these programs across college football. But especially coming off that offseason, week 1's a crapshoot. You don't really know what to expect. What you can expect is that Oklahoma is going to get a run for their money from a lot of these Big 12 programs, especially if they're shorthanded. So what I didn't like to see so many guys shelved, and that's got to be priority number 1 for Lincoln Riley and the Sooner staff, is making sure that they control the spread of the pandemic within their program and ensure that they never have to deal with that many guys sitting out a game again. Because especially when you're looking at key contributors for the Sooners like TJ Pledger, like Obi Obialo, like Gabe Burkich, whom you mentioned earlier, those are the kind of guys that you need to have active. And you need to be able to roll everybody out, especially against some of these higher-end Big 12 teams like Texas and Oklahoma State, who are going to be hungry to beat you and knock you off the pedestal as the 5-time defending Big 12 champs.
Yeah, I think you really said it well. Now, what we know is that the women's soccer team came down with a bunch of positive tests or contact tracing as well. Their season opener, Bedlam soccer against Oklahoma State, had to be postponed. What that tells you is that, the athletes, a lot of them live in the same space, Headington Hall. They hang out together. They go to parties together. I'm not saying they party together, so to speak, but they go to parties, they hang out, they go to social events, and yes, they do party together sometimes. So that's just part of being in college. It's just part of the experience. But what you're saying is exactly right. Lincoln Riley needs to use this game against little old Missouri State and say, guys, 20 of you from the 2 deep, 20 from the 2 deep, which is roughly 42% of the 2 deep, had to sit this game out. You lost a college football game. You didn't lose it, but you couldn't play in a college football game because you were not disciplined enough to follow our instructions, to do what we said, to follow the guidelines that we've laid out for you. You thought it was more important to go hang out with a bunch of soccer players or whoever. And that's why all these kids were made to sit out. It's like he's got no better illustration for the rest of the season than the season opener, in which he really didn't need any of those guys. So, yeah, you're right. If they play K-State and they're down 20 guys from the two deep, they're probably not going to win. Now, I'll say this. This is the hard part for me because I have a college kid, and I had a college kid who was an athlete, so I don't want to be unfair here. I don't want to pile on. I'm a professional sports writer, and I've always been, one who tries to take a firm but fair stance. So I'm going to try to be honest, but I'm going to try to be fair. I didn't like Eric Swenson's pass protection. Parker, a handful of times, Spencer Rattler either got sacked or threw the ball under pressure, and that pressure always seemed to be coming from Swenson's side. So, now to be fair, Swenson played left tackle last year. He was playing right tackle last night, so he had to fill in, as we talked about, for some COVID absences. Adrian Neely slides from the right side to the left side, so there's probably some technique situations at play. No need to hit the panic button about Eric Swenson, so I don't want to be too hard on him, but clearly he's not the long-term solution here, even though he is a senior. I didn't like Trey Brown's hands, Parker. Another ball hit him right dead center in between his hands, and he could not come down with another interception. Now, I'll give you full disclosure here as well. He and Pat Fields were on some Union teams when my son was playing for the U, and we love those guys. Our family loves those guys. They're Union kids. They're great kids. We know their background, so we've always had an affinity for Pat and for Trey. Nobody can ever question Trey Brown's effort or his intensity or his love for the program or the game of football. But man, oh man, one of those passes deflected off his receiver's hands. It was gift wrapped for him and put right in his lap, and he still dropped it on the floor. Couldn't grab it. I thought Alex Grinch was going to run out there and pull a Woody Hayes instead of smacking a guy for intercepting a ball. He's smacking a guy for not intercepting a ball. And along those lines, I didn't like very much anyway. The play of the Oklahoma secondary. The Missouri State quarterback, Jayden Johnson, I don't think he's a very good thrower, although we have every reason to believe he'll get better playing for Bobby Petrino. We never really had any reason to believe that any of his throws were going to be caught. And that is no credit, I'm afraid to say, to the OU secondary, not in a large degree, because a lot of those receivers were open. Some of them were wide open. Two of those guys dropped interceptions before Delaire Turner-Yell finally got his, but some of those Missouri State receivers were open, and Johnson just couldn't get him the football. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, we're going to tell you which players from last night had what you might call underrated performances. Trade Pros Heat and Air in Oklahoma City. Whether you just need service or a mini split for your home office, studio, or man cave, or if you're finally ready to upgrade to a more efficient train system for your entire home, get a free estimate from Trade Pros for all your heating and air needs. Trade Pros earned a Best of 2020 award from Home Advisor and has nothing but 5-star reviews on Google. Go to TradeProsOKC.com or call 405-675-0176 or just book your appointment on Facebook. Trade Pros, that's one word, Trade Pros Heat and Air. All right, social media. Follow SI Sooners on Twitter at @all_Sooners. Find Parker at Parker Thune on Twitter, Thune. I'm at John E. Hoover. Parker's also on Instagram, Parker Thune, and I'm on Facebook, John E. Hoover Media. And, of course, all my videos, press conferences, interviews, and more, including this one, are over on my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. I got to say, man, I love the video version. It is so much fun to interact with Parker. To let you guys a little bit behind the screen here, we got a camera in front of me, and over here I've got the iPhone, and so Parker and I are talking over the Bluetooth, over the iPhone. We're communicating, but we're going to do this video-wise. It's a little bit more work, but it's a lot more fun. I think it's a good product. You guys seem to enjoy it. So if you're over there at the John Hoover Media YouTube channel, just click subscribe. Don't forget also, if you're on my first channel, that channel is going to be going away, so you're going to need to subscribe to the other one. I will put a card up here in the YouTube video so you'll know what I'm talking about. We got lots of OU football content going up there every day. And you know what? We just came out of a commercial break, and yes, you heard that correctly. Our first advertiser has jumped on board. I could not be more thankful. We are grateful to Caleb and Carrie over at Trade Pros in Moore, Oklahoma City area. We're looking forward to hearing a lot more from those guys in the coming months. If you're thinking that you might want to get in on the action here at the SI Sooners podcast and advertise with us, we can do regular commercial breaks just like that one, or we can do sponsorships where you just simply sponsor one of our benchmark segments. We got one of those coming up. All you got to do is drop us an email because frankly, you got to better do it quick because we're starting to fill up a little bit. Send me an email, allsoonersi@gmail.com, and we'll get you on the list. Okay, Parker. OU wipes the floor with Missouri State last night, 48-0. If Rambo and Stogner catch those touchdown passes, it's 56-0. And my score prediction hits exactly on the number. I picked 66-10, which is a 56-point spread. Hard to beat that, although you predicted the shutout. I think 62-0, 64-0. Is that what you picked?
Well, I said 66-0, but yes, my big thing all week was, hey, the Sooners are going to shut them out. And hey, they sure held up their end of the bargain, and it did take a missed field goal from the Bears to make it happen. But hey, 0 points is 0 points. I'll take that.
You get bonus points for the shutout. I'm going to have to go back and look at mine. Maybe mine was 64-10. I think my score might have been 64-10. So, okay, my memory's not that good. You guys know that by now. Obviously, you get maybe double bonus points to be bold enough to say that there's an Oklahoma defense out there somewhere that's going to pitch a shutout. I don't care if it is Missouri State and Jayden Johnson. They got Bobby Petrino as their head coach. He hasn't been shut out in something like 180 consecutive games as a head coach. So that's important. So kudos to you. Let's get right to the big story of the night, and that was the quarterback play. Spencer Rattler is the man. He's the man. He's the man. Tanner Mordecai needs to throw the football with confidence like he did after his interception. And Chandler Morris is a freshman who's got some wheels and can play some freaking football. A couple things. Parker, what did you think about the quarterbacks as a whole? The quarterback group, Lincoln Riley's room, shall we say, as a whole?
Well, let's start with Rattler. The guy certainly looked the part. I mean, the biggest thing to me, John, was it just looked effortless coming out of Spencer Rattler's hand. He plays a real easy quarterback position. He just makes it look so smooth, and he never seems to be panicked. And I get that it was Missouri State. I get that the Sooners were going to win that game running away one way or another. But still, there's something to be said for coming out and taking care of business and picking apart a secondary that you should pick apart. And Spencer Rattler did that. Now, I'll be curious to see how he responds against the more solid secondaries in the Big 12 once conference play rolls along, but this was a great stepping stone for him. I think there's always pressure when you come out with high expectations on your shoulders in your first start as a Sooner, especially given the lineage that Rattler is now following as the starting quarterback at Oklahoma. Mayfield, Murray, Hurts. We know how it goes. So big first performance from Rattler. You mentioned Mordecai. He didn't take as many shots down the field as Rattler did, although that probably has to do somewhat with the play calling at that point in the game. The interception was egregiously bad. It was not a good look for Mordecai at all. He had Marcus Major wide open for a touchdown, tried to force it instead, and it ended up getting picked off. It was a real sour note to what otherwise was a pretty solid night for Mordecai. I was really impressed, though, with Chandler Morris, and we only got to see him conduct one drive as quarterback for Oklahoma, but he showed very, very impressive pocket presence for a true freshman. He knew exactly when he needed to get out of the pocket, exactly when he needed to scramble, exactly when that open field was there for him to take advantage of. The guy's got mobility, which is really not a skill that we are used to seeing from quarterbacks at Oklahoma. Obviously, Mayfield and Murray and Hurts kind of broke the mold, but for the longest time, it was just your standard drop back type of quarterback in the mold of a Jason White, a Sam Bradford. So if Morris is going to be the next guy in the lineage of athletic quarterbacks at the University of Oklahoma, well, I shouldn't say that because obviously he doesn't really have a path to start with Rattler helming the team here in 2020 and then presumably Caleb Williams the next man up. But I will say that Morris seems to fit the bill in terms of the type of quarterback that Lincoln Riley's offense demands. So if worst comes to worst and Rattler goes down with COVID-19 or with an injury, I wouldn't be shocked if the Sooners turn to Morris over Mordecai, I'll be honest, just because of that mobility and that open field elusiveness that Morris brings that Mordecai doesn't necessarily have. And I thought it was a real strong showing for Chandler Morris.
I thought it was a strong showing for all three guys, and you would expect that against Missouri State. Now, Rattler, here's the thing. Rattler did get sacked 3 times, and I mentioned Eric Swenson earlier. I thought all 3 of the actual sacks were on him. I thought he trusted his protection, which is what you're supposed to do. But you're also supposed to have, as a quarterback, you're supposed to have this clock ticking in your head. Okay, 1,001, 1,002, 1,003, my guy's not there. I need to make something happen. I need to slide. I need to step up. I need to do something. And he hasn't developed that at this stage yet in his Oklahoma career. Now, he did make some plays with his feet. And I'm not talking about the zone read. I'm talking about stepping up and sliding and buying himself some time. I'm going to get to that play here where he did that in just a little bit. But the more he plays, the more he sees that field, the more he sees defenses and feels those guys coming at him, the more he's going to get a feel for that side of the game. Second thing, we talked last week, I think, about Rattler playing into the third quarter, maybe even the fourth quarter, and our idea on this was, well, he's young. He's a redshirt freshman. He's never gotten a college team before. He's going to need a lot of snaps, but you know what? Looking back on it, okay, first I'll admit, Lincoln Riley is smarter than me. He's probably smarter than you, Parker. He's probably smarter than most of our audience, especially when it comes to quarterbacks. I think they handled it just right. I do. Rattler was out at halftime. Mordecai got to go started at halftime and then went right up till the end of the fourth quarter before Chandler Morris came in. And then they ran what looked like pretty much the whole offense with Chandler Morris under center. So I think all three of those things were extremely encouraging for Lincoln Riley and for OU fans. It's more important right now in this age of 2020, in this COVID era, it's more important to get your backups ready than it is to get your starter, your young redshirt freshman starter, maybe 20 extra snaps against Missouri State. Now, on Tanner, I will say this. I'm telling you, I think it looked like Lincoln Riley at some point pulled him aside after that kind of weak-ass interception. And I think Lincoln Riley said something along the lines of, hey, knock it off. Quit playing like a little princess. Quit trying to feather the ball when you throw it and just plant your back foot and throw the freaking football. Because after that interception, that's exactly what he did. He looked like a completely different quarterback. That first drive, he was hesitant. He was off his back foot a little bit, even on his completions. He floated one behind Theo Howard, had to make a turnaround catch. He floated another one out on the sideline, and then he floated his interception. After that, he was throwing nothing but fastballs. And, I mean, he looked great doing it. Then, last, does he maybe have reason to be motivated by Chandler Morris, Parker?
Well, John, I got to be honest. I think Chandler Morris stands a great chance of moving up to number 2 on the depth chart at some point this season. I think Tanner Mordecai definitely has to have a little fire lit under him by Morris's performance, abbreviated though it was against Missouri State, because to be honest, all things considered, I think he looked more impressive than Mordecai, and I think he demonstrated some tools in his arsenal that Mordecai doesn't necessarily have. I talked about the mobility. I think that's one thing that Morris definitely has to his advantage, and look, it's not as if the Sooners are going to redshirt Morris. This is essentially a free year of eligibility for everybody. So I would not at all be shocked if Mordecai loses his spot second on the depth chart to Morris. I would not be surprised at all. And I definitely think that's something that Mordecai should be motivated by as the season progresses.
Yeah, interesting. So, Parker, in this game last night, who had a performance that was maybe underrated in your eyes last night?
I'll tell you what, I'll go back to Mikey Henderson, whom I mentioned in our opening segment, but I think his contribution was somewhat lost, probably due to the fact that he didn't find the end zone like his fellow true freshmen Seth Mcgowan and Marvin Mims. But I thought he showed some really nice route running abilities, some open field elusiveness as a ball carrier, and I think he's one of those guys that's going to have a very kind of all over the place role. That, Lincoln Riley loves to use the H-back all over the field, and I think Mikey Henderson fits that mold really, really well. He doesn't stand a start this year, probably next year either, but down the line, I think Henderson can be a big contributor for the Sooners on offense by virtue of his versatility, his size, and his ability to make guys miss. So, although he didn't necessarily get the same press last night and the same headlines as McGowan or Mims, I really liked what Mikey Henderson brought to the table. I'll also give a quick shout out to Delarian Turner-Yell, and I get that he had the interception, and maybe that's not as much of a sleeper pick in terms of solid performances as a guy like Mikey Henderson, but Turner-Yell also was really all over the field as a tackler. It wasn't just the interception that left me impressed with his performance. I thought he played a really good game all around, and it wasn't only the pick that was a testament last night to Turner Yale's ability on the defensive side of the football. He looks much improved from last year in my eyes.
Those are good picks. I'm tempted to say Steven Johnson here. Your All-American kicker sits out with, whatever, COVID, contact tracing, or like he tweeted, just he overslept. I don't know about that. But then your walk-on comes in and he drops a 2 for 2 on field goals and 6 for 6 on PATs. And one of his threes was a 42-yarder. Now, that was nice. But no, mine is Perrion Winfrey. He was impressive. He did not start. He did not get in that early, but he did. When he did get in, he wrecked shop. He was underrated, but yet if you were watching him, you could see a dominating performance. He was tossing his guy aside, like shoving the center into the running back or the quarterback when he was rushing the passer. The Jayden Johnson, the quarterback, was running for his life a couple of times because there was nowhere to go because Perrion Winfrey had collapsed the pocket. He finished with 3 tackles, and he really didn't play, a whole bunch. But I think what little sample size we saw, I liked it a lot. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, we're going to lay out some of the best plays from last night's game that maybe you did not notice.
Hey there, loyal listeners. Parker Thune here with SI Sooners. Are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman, or a car dealership in Oklahoma City, or a restaurant in Edmond. Or maybe you're just a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise, and you want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day, and the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or send us a direct message on Twitter at @all_Sooners.
Final segment of the SI Sooners podcast. Man, Parker, you were at the stadium a couple hours before I was, and you were texting me as I was driving in, some of the guys who were not there. So when I got to the press box, I'm like, hey, y'all see who's warming up and stretching and all that stuff? And our man Keegan Renault over at Sooners Wire showed me his two deep, his little flip chart, I guess it's called. He showed me the comprehensive list. 20 guys, like I said earlier, about 40% of the two deep were not suited up. We'll just go down to the top, from the top down. TJ Pledger, Ramondre Stevenson, Braden Willis, Trajan Bridges, Anton Harrison, Stacy Wilkins, Andrew Rame, Obi Obialo, and Drake Stoops, and that's just the offense. And then there's Ronnie Perkins on defense, Marcus Stripling, Corey Roberson, Jordan Kelly, Shane Witter, DJ Graham, Kendall Dennis, Justin Broyles, and Bryson Washington on defense, plus, of course, Gabe Burkich on special teams. Holy cow, Parker. What was Lincoln Riley supposed to do with that?
Well, I mean, in that situation, you got to do what Riley did, which is, hey, take a look at who we got coming in, who's on the deeper end of the bench, some of those true freshmen, and say, hey, who's demonstrated some ability in preseason practices and fall camp, and who's willing to step into the void left by some of those guys that didn't suit up, and who's going to take this as a challenge, respond to it, and go out there and make a play. And fortunately, the Sooners had several guys that were able to do that. Now, it hurts to have some of those guys gone, and you would hope that's not the case in 2 weeks when they take on Kansas State. They were especially ravaged at the wide receiver position. You talked about Obi Obialo and Drake Stoops sitting out. Braden Willis wasn't available at the H-back spot, so it seemed to be a lot more prevalent on the offensive side of the football, the Sooners missing links, than it was on the defense, which is probably for the best, because I would think that the widespread expectation at this point in time is that the Sooners are more confident in their offensive depth than their defensive depth, just based on history there. But going forward, the Sooners have to be real concerned about what things are going to look like if they get into Big 12 play, and they're still missing some of these guys. Hopefully they quarantine and they're cleared 2 weeks from now. Obviously 2 weeks is kind of the standard in terms of that quarantine duration. So the hope is that they're back to full strength by the time the Kansas State game rolls around. But what I was most impressed with, John, and I mentioned this at the top, what I was most impressed with is the fact that nobody, had they looked at a depth chart for the first time on Saturday, would have been under the impression that the Sooners were down 20 players. You would have had to know that when you were watching the game to realize that the Sooners were shorthanded, because they took care of business and got contributions from all around. So if you didn't know any better, you simply would not have been able to pick up on the fact that there were 20 members of the Sooners 2 deep unavailable.
Guys stepped up, Parker. I thought guys really stepped up, and I think that was reflective of their leader. Teams take on the image or the personality of their leader, and in this case, I'm talking about Lincoln Riley. You mentioned it. His charge to them was for guys to step up into an opportunity. If this guy's out, the next man up. He took that as a coach, and he mentioned this last night in his post-game press conference. As a coach, he said, yeah, it's not fun. It's a challenge every day to have to deal with this. Something new comes up that you're not prepared for. He said, but also in a lot of ways, it's actually fun. It's actually fun to as a challenge. It's a challenge as a coach to say, let's go out there and find some guys who can fill these roles. Let's go out there and find the backups who we haven't found yet. Identify who those next generation players are that we haven't found yet. I thought he was very eloquent in the way he said it. He said it a lot better than I did just now. But that is, I think, a reflection of the way the team played last night under duress with 20 guys from the 2 deep out. I thought that was a reflection of Lincoln Riley, and he deserves a hell of a lot of credit for getting that team ready to play, no matter who was available on the depth chart. I do want to go over some under-the-radar guys from last night. I love this. This is probably my favorite segment of this podcast. You go watch the highlight package, and you see the big arm from Spencer Rattler. You see the quick feet from Seth McGowan, the suddenness, remember? You see the speed from Charleston Rambo, especially on that little short crossing route where he just outran literally 11 guys to the end zone. No one was going to catch him. But to me, in football games, there's always a handful of plays that don't necessarily make the tape, so to speak, the highlight reel. So I want to get to those because to me, those are the guys, those are the plays that can win you games or can lose you games. First drive, Parker, I hope you remember this. Spencer Rattler drops back to pass. Nobody's open. He has to make his first, what Lincoln Riley would call an off-script play. All right? The first option's not there, so he's got to all of a sudden look downfield and, hey, everybody's covered. He's got to come up with something. His young quarterback, redshirt freshman, has to come up with his own ideas here because the script didn't work. The play didn't work. So what does he do? He steps up, he rolls away from pressure, and he fires an absolute laser to Jeremiah Hall, who makes a great sliding comeback catch, remember. Boy, that was something at the 2 or 3 yard line. There was that swing pass, or I think it was kind of a screen pass to Seth McGowan, the one where he cuts up and jukes a guy and boom, he outruns another guy and scores pretty much untouched. Well, down the field, you got to see Mikey Henderson throwing a key block, like you mentioned a few minutes ago on Mikey Henderson, doing the underrated stuff, the gritty, nose-grinding, blue-collar type work. And then further down the field, down on the sideline, you saw Theo Weiss blocking his man out of the play. Those kind of plays, especially for a coach who's trying to develop young talent, those plays are huge. Early in the second quarter, there was a play. Rattler runs a play action, drops back, waits for his man to clear, and then he fires, just an absolute dart to Theo Weiss on a post corner. Rattler's the one I was talking about earlier. Rattler's in the middle of the field when he throws it, and by the time Weiss catches it, he's literally on the sidelines, tiptoeing the sidelines. So I looked at it frame by frame. It amounted to a 42-yard out route. What? We've never seen a 42-yard out route before, but that post corner, he had to wait for his man to get open, and then diagonally, when you're talking diagonally, it was like 53, 55 yards, and he threw it on a freaking rope. Best throw of the game for my money, by far. And not only that, but the defender was right on Weiss's hip, and Weiss is tiptoeing the sideline. He's got literally nowhere else to throw that thing. It had to be in that spot, and it had to be on time, and I'm telling you, Parker, that was a Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray throw if I've ever seen one. The defense, I thought, had a bunch of underrated performance-type moments. 7 straight 3-and-outs is one of them. You think that's not positive reinforcement for those guys that are starting out their second year under Alex Grinch? Huge, huge Parker, what plays were you going to remember from last night that kind of might have gone unnoticed?
I'll tell you what, Isaiah Thomas earned rave reviews from the coaching staff in the aftermath of last night's game, and it was really easy to overlook his two big plays just because of how well the Sooners defense played all around. But he made two crucial plays in the backfield. I shouldn't say crucial in terms of their impact on the game, but he got into the backfield and was all alone, and it was just him man on man, and made two stops that otherwise probably could have gone for big gains for the Bears. So it was great to see Isaiah Thomas step up in Ronnie Perkins' absence and shoot the gaps, make those plays, establish his presence in the backfield. Woody Washington made a great read on a Jayden Johnson pass and almost ended up with an interception. You go back to Brian Asamoah, whom we already talked about, but the very first two plays of the game, he was in the backfield shutting down the Bears' run design. And then you go back to the offensive side of the football, I want to shout out Trayvon West because he didn't get a whole lot of run. Much like Chandler Morris, it was about the last drive, and that was pretty much it. But he made a very nice catch along the sideline on a ball that Morris seemed to lead him just a little too much on. Nevertheless, West reached out, made the fingertip grab as he was diving to the ground. It was a play that the Sooners sideline reacted to with much fanfare, and it was well-deserved. You know, a guy like that, true freshman, gets lost in the shuffle beyond a whole bunch of other talented wide receivers that the Sooners have on their roster, but takes advantage of the moment that he does get and makes a play. And you can say the same for Finn Corwin, whose first reception as a Sooner last night went for a 16-yard touchdown from Tanner Mordecai.
Trayvon West caught that ball inches from the turf. Finn Corwin became in my opinion, a crowd favorite last night, a sentimental favorite. And in all, I think 9 true freshmen got in the game. Again, part of that is, yes, it's Missouri State. Part of that is the recruiting has picked up and these guys are ready to play. Listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts, or just go to our website, allsooners.com. Click on the player and listen, either on your phone, your tablet, or your computer. And do not forget to check out the video version over on my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. For Parker Thune, I'm John Hoover. See you guys.